A short-sighted decision in Washington, D.C. has been rectified, and it is an absolute net positive for BYU and the rest of college athletics. But as always, there's always the law of unintended consequences with change.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com today to get started. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's as simple as that. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about how Title IX regulations regarding revenue sharing under the House settlement have been pulled back, and it's a good thing for BYU. We'll also talk about the NFL Combine and BYU getting snubbed in that event, and then we'll finish up today's show by talking about one of the more exciting prospects of recent memory for BYU in the recruiting path, Ryder Lyons. Is BYU in on him? We'll talk about all of it coming up. All right, so starting off today's show, remember I did a podcast, this goes back probably close to a month at this point, that it's less than that, but regardless, in the final days of the Biden administration in Washington, D.C., remember I did a big old podcast, actually did incredible numbers, that the U.S. Department of Education put out a statement saying that Title IX required under the House settlement that's about to be legitimized, finalized, whatever you want to term it, on April 7th, it was going to require what looks like a $20.5 million revenue share from BYU and other universities to be equally distributed to male and female athletes. Now, I said at that time, this is going to cause all kinds of problems because here's the deal. BYU and many other universities, particularly at the Power 4 level, had already drawn up contracts, had already discussed with various athletes, mainly football players and men's basketball players, that, hey, here is what we are going to be doing revenue share-wise. Here is what you are entitled to money-wise. Sign the contract. It's done. Once we have finalization of the House settlement, come July 1, when those payments are able to be rolled out, we start paying you. Well, when that guidance came from the Biden administration, it threw a bunch of people for a loop. And I said at the time, this is going to end up in the court system. There's going to be litigation. Lawyers, once again, billable hours are undefeated. Well, in, I guess, a sense of some sanity prevailing here, the U.S. Department of Education earlier this week issued a statement regarding that 9-page Title IX guidance on name, image, and likeness issued in the final days of the Biden administration. I'm going to read the statement in full, and then I will explain exactly what it means for BYU and why this is the right way to approach this. Quote, the NIL guidance rammed through the Biden administration in its final days is overly burdensome, profoundly unfair, and goes well beyond what an agency guidance is intended to achieve. Without a credible legal justification, the Biden administration claimed that NIL agreements between schools and student athletes are akin to financial aid and must, therefore, be proportionally distributed between male and female athletes under Title IX. Enacted over 50 years ago, Title IX says nothing about how revenue-generating athletics programs should allocate compensation among student athletes. The claim that Title IX forces schools and colleges to distribute student-athlete revenues proportionally based on gender equity considerations is sweeping and would require clear legal authority to support it. That does not exist. Accordingly, the Biden NIL guidance is rescinded, said Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Craig Traynor. Jake, what in the heck did you just read? Can you explain it for me and give it to me in layman's terms? Essentially, the new administration, the Department of Education here, is saying that, hey, these are revenue-generating sports. And if they are, once again, they're revenue generators, they are entitled, obviously, to the lion's share of that revenue being derived and being paid back out to them. Most of you know, if you don't, let me school you to the game a little bit here, that there are mainly two chief revenue generating sports in most athletic departments. Those are football and men's basketball. Now, there is obviously other programs in various universities that are going to be revenue generators of their own, but they pale in comparison to those two sports, football and men's basketball. I can think of BYU women's soccer. I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine that they are a revenue generator to a small degree. I look up the road at the University of Utah, the Red Rocks, their women's gymnastics program, that's revenue generator. But the lion's share, we're talking the vast majority, 95 to 99% of the revenue generated by a college athletic department comes by means of the football program and the men's basketball program. The guidance here is that the lion's share of the revenue being distributed amongst these athletes, which the estimates right now are going to be $20.5 million. That is double digits and quite a bit of money for the Joe Blow, yours truly included out here, who could only imagine having that much money being distributed. But the simple fact of the matter is a number of universities, BYU among them, had already anticipated spending 80 to 90% of the money that revenue generated, the revenue share was going to be directed towards football and men's basketball athletes. The other 10, 5, whatever percent you have, that's a holdover for the other athletic programs in your school. Now, some of you might be saying, well, it is unfair that these athletes that could be playing other sports don't get the same opportunities to make a revenue share. Guess what? This is all about how much money you make for the university. Therefore, you are entitled to X amount. I also said that there have been contracts signed at various universities with these athletes, and had the old Title IX enforcement from the U.S. Department of Education been in effect, you would have had all kinds of litigation going on. We're talking athletes lawyering up and saying, I have a contract that entitles me to this much. I better be paid it or else. It was going to throw the entire system for a loop and once again threaten the very creaky framework of what college athletics seems to operate under. But I think sanity has prevailed here. And I also will add, this is going to help BYU. BYU is not having to dig and penny pinch in different areas to come up with this revenue share. BYU is that new money type program that when they joined the Big 12, they had quite literally never had that much money coming into their athletic coffers via the media rights deals from the Big 12, et cetera. And that was even as a half share member. BYU will be able to essentially set up their budgets to immediately absorb and have this 20, and it obviously will escalate over time to whatever amount of money. They will have that in their budget. And once again, they're not having to cut corners like other universities. We have seen a number of universities. Indiana has been cutting staff across its athletic department to try and find ways to absorb having to carve out a $20 million piece of their budget to pay out to their athletes. There are going to be a number of universities who they're going to feel the pinch when it comes to this. But BYU, they're going to go headlong into it. Tom Homo, Brian Santiago, the brain trust of the BYU athletic department, they have been on this from the get-go. And BYU will be right there, ready to rock and roll. And the nice part is they can use that to their advantage. When they look at other universities, once again, who are having to scrounge up and try and find a way to get that $20 million, they can essentially turn around and say, see, we're ready to rock and roll. And that can parlay down into, hey, if you're an athlete that's being recruited by BYU, if BYU proves out that they are going to pay you what they owe you and they pay it on time, they're reliable, that could go a long way to swaying some young man or young woman's decision when it comes to coming to BYU. Now, I also mentioned there's the law of unintended consequences. Just real quick on this. On the flip side of it, the House settlement is going to impose roster limits on athletes. Doug Robinson from the Deseret News did a great piece talking to Ed Eyestone, BYU track and field coach and men's cross country coach. And the simple fact is that there are going to be a number of track athletes at BYU who don't have a roster spot next year. It's much like the football program. Remember, I've talked about this. There's 123-man rosters in college football that are now being pared down to 105-man rosters. And eventually, those are supposed to be fully funded scholarships where the walk-on doesn't exist in sports anymore. At Eyestone is being capped at 45 athletes. This is a BYU track and field program that, as I understand, has routinely carried 50 to maybe 60 athletes. You're going to be telling a number of young men and young women that, hey, we appreciate everything you've brought to this athletic department and to this program, speaking of track and field. The simple fact of the matter is we're capped out and we have no way to keep you around. That's the flip side of this House settlement. But the money is there. The money is, I think, like I said, sanity has prevailed, it looks like, because we all knew that lawyers were obviously going to be like, hey, it's my time to shine. Let me see if I can get some more billable hours. But it's going to help BYU because they have never known to have, they've never had to deal with having to cut back on their expenses to absorb this revenue share. There are a lot of their compatriots in the Big 12 and beyond in these various Power 4 conferences who are going to have to rely on donors and hope that the donors will pony up. I think BYU is able to handle in-house, and that's nice to have because we all know the NIL is not going anywhere. The revenue share is great. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars going to these various athletes in the football and men's basketball programs, and that's great for these athletes. But the nice part is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars beyond that from NIL and collectives are still going to be flowing around. It's never been a better time to be a student athlete and have your opportunity to cash in on it. And if you're playing football or men's basketball, enjoy it because you're going to get, like I said, the lion's share of that money. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about BYU and the NFL Combine. I think the Cougars got really screwed by the NFL, and I'll explain next why. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys when it comes to the NBA action. When the game tips off, there's no better place to get in on it than with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback or really anything in between, you can stay in on the action all game long. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay, obviously, that would get you that higher payout. So take advantage of the opportunity today. New FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today or check them out on their app. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with our friends over at FanDuel. They are an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well. Friday, snow is absolutely miserable here along the Wasatch Front, but nonetheless, hope you guys are having a fantastic Valentine's Day, taking care of your loved ones. They're near and dear to you, obviously, on this day that celebrates love. But let's talk about the love not being reciprocated by the NFL to BYU. Yesterday, the NFL Combine list came out, the full list of athletes invited to the annual, they call it the NFL Scouting Combine, I think is what they call it, out there at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. And BYU got one invite to this. Tyler Batty, and I expected Tyler to obviously get that. He is headed to Indianapolis, but where in the heck are the other BYU Cougars I thought that were going to end up at the NFL Combine? There are two names, most of all, that I anticipated getting a combine invite. They got snubbed. They are Caleb Etienne and Jacob Robinson. Some of you are saying, well, what about Connor Pay? I think Connor and the injury he suffered at midseason has precluded him from getting that invite, even though I would stump for my guy to get that invite. And maybe at some point there could be a late invite on all three of these, but currently none of them are going to this. What that means is typically when it comes to NFL Combine invites, the NFL polls all 32 teams. They essentially share their draft list, the athletes they believe are draftable athletes, their full draft list. And if there's corresponding athletes, multiple franchises believe a singular athlete is a draftable athlete, they typically get an invite to the NFL Combine. Now, not getting an invite to the Combine is not the death knell for your chances of going in the NFL draft. There are a number of guys, dozens in fact, who will hear their names called coming up in April that did not go to the Combine. But here's the deal. BYU has two all-conference performers outside of Tyler Batty, who, by the way, was very, very good this past year for BYU, had maybe one of his finest seasons, if not his finest season, in a Cougar uniform. But Caleb Etienne had a remarkable turnaround. He was a first-team all-conference left tackle, and you're going to snub him and not send him to Indianapolis? What in the heck? I don't get that. Now, I do know that Caleb was intent on using that extra year that was afforded originally by Diego Pavia, the Vanderbilt quarterback, to come back to BYU for another season. Well, situations popped up. There were some legalese in that, quote, blanket waiver, which never was actually a blanket waiver, but that's beside the point, that essentially told Caleb, yeah, your chances of getting that year back are slim to none. So he said, hey, I'm going to make the announcement. I'm going pro. And I still believe Caleb Etienne is a draftable athlete. Obviously, there's going to be film juxtaposed from his time at BYU from 2023 to 2024 and saying, okay, where's the real Caleb Etienne? I would believe that the real Caleb Etienne is what we saw on the field this past season. He had settled in. He was far more comfortable with actually good coaching under TJ Woods, and he thrived in that circumstance. If you are a first-team all-conference honoree in a Power 4 conference, I do not for the life of me understand how you cannot be invited to the NFL Combine. It means, and like I said, as I understand it with NFL Combine, that not enough teams had him as a draftable prospect. That's disappointing. Other guy, Jacob Robinson. Jacob has been a guy who has been a steady performer and has improved every single season he was at BYU. Yes, he is slight of frame. Yes, he may not be the fastest cornerback or the tallest cornerback that you're going to see in this draft class, but what Jacob Robinson has is a playmaking ability and just a penchant for being what the team, speaking of BYU or whoever ends up playing for in the NFL, he will be whatever they need him to be, and he will accomplish what he needs to get the job done. He was a second-team all-conference honoree. How in the heck do these guys not get that opportunity? I don't want to say it's a conspiracy theory because I don't think it is, because once again, the NFL is not over there twirling their mustache and saying, "Whoa, let's get BYU." The fact is the NFL teams apparently don't see BYU still as a place that can develop and pump out top-tier athletes, which is baffling to me. Look at the athletes BYU has in the NFL right now. They have got the best punter in most people's eyes in Ryan Rico. They've got the best linebacker in the NFL in Fred Warner. They got the best all-around athlete in the league in Taysom Hill, the Swiss Army knife. They've got guys like Jamal Williams out there, Sione Takitaki. I can just go down the list of the athletes that BYU has in the NFL right now. And I would be asking myself, what are we doing wrong? If I'm Kalani Sitake, I'm calling up these NFL franchises who sent scout after scout after scout to BYU and saying, why are my guys not getting a draftable grade from you guys? What are we doing wrong here? That's the concern I would have if I'm BYU, is that does the NFL just continue to think that we're not an NFL factory? Because Kalani said it. He wants guys, if they have aspirations, and by and large they all do, of playing in the NFL, to have that opportunity. Let me reiterate, it is not the end-all, be-all to be invited to the NFL Combine, because there are a number of guys, I think Caleb and Jacob among them, so long as their workouts at the Big 12 Pro Day go well, their individual workouts with teams, the visits they make, the interviews they will do, they ace all that stuff, they could very well still hear their name called on in the NFL draft. But going into the Combine, it's a mark of prestige, and it tells you it's like a self-assurance. Yes, I am an NFL caliber athlete. And it's disappointing. It sucks because it reflects poorly on BYU. And I'm going to stump as hard as anybody for BYU, because Kalani has done an incredible job, speaking of Kalani Sitake, to foster a program that is very, very welcoming to NFL scouts. And they want to make sure, once again, that these athletes that come and play at BYU have that opportunity to go and play at the professional level. I hope that at some point it turns around and BYU starts to get more guys getting invites to events like this. The Senior Bowl, I know that Tyler went to the East-West Shrine game. Jacob Robinson ended up being a late addition to that. And there could be some late invites coming out from the Combine if guys withdraw due to injury, etc. And I hope that this gets rectified to some level, because it's not a good look for BYU. Trust me, I already saw some certain fan bases that are 40 miles north dunking on BYU. See, you had an incredible season. You got one guy at the Combine. We got 3. Great. So be it. It's a tough pill to swallow. And I feel mostly for guys like a Caleb Etienne, like a Jacob Robinson, because that's got to be a little bit of a blow to the ego. I'm sure their agents are going to pump up and say, hey, don't worry about it. We'll be okay. But it's still, something doesn't sit right about this with me when it comes to the Combine. And I don't have a perfect answer for it, but I do sincerely hope at some point that it comes back around. Essentially, okay, we got one this year, maybe next year. And I think guys like Jack Kelly, Isaiah Glasker, they could obviously, and they should get NFL Combine invites. So that could kind of swing the pendulum back the other way. But I hope that the pendulum stays on the other side going forward for the foreseeable future. All right, we'll finish up today's show still on a football note. We'll talk about Ryder Lyons, 5-star prospect, the number 2 overall quarterback in the 2026 recruiting cycle. There's some smoke out there about BYU's chances of bringing him in and getting commitment from him, and we'll talk about those next right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for being Locked On Cougars. Your first listen today. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Factor. Now, probably saying, okay, what Factor are you talking about here, Jake? The bigger point you made is Factor is here for you guys to help you dial in your nutrition. Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every single week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto, and a number more. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. Obviously, they want to make it as simple as possible. I think Factor takes the best part is the stress out of your meal plan. You're not having to think about it. Okay, what am I making today? What am I making tomorrow? They got it all for you guys. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess. Just great food in minutes. So eat smart with our friends at Factor. Get started today at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off and use the promo code lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's promo code LOCKEDONCollege50 off at factormeals.com/LOCKEDONCollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. It's all courtesy of our friends over at Factor. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, before we go on today's show, there was some pub for Ryder Lyons, and there's always pub for this young man, by the way. Ryder is a bona fide 5-star prospect. He is currently the number 2 prospect in this upcoming recruiting cycle, according to 24/7 Sports. And this is really cool to see this. I was sent the quote, said, Jake, did you see this about Ryder Lyons? This comes from, he was at an event this past weekend, what they call it. It was the Nike's Next Ones. It was down in Louisiana, kind of on Super Bowl weekend. And by all accounts, Ryder performed very, very well at the event. But the quote here was, quote, Folsom, California high school quarterback, Ryder Lyons, the number 6 overall player. He's the number 2 quarterback once again. Is one of the top arms in the nation. As it stands now, he's, quote, definitely, unquote, taking official visits to USC, Oregon, and BYU. However, before those, he expects to take unofficial visits to Oregon, Michigan, and Ohio State this spring. Regarding his commitment, look for something in July. Lyons was a heavy lean to the Trojans early on, and that's no surprise there. Let me insert that his brother Walker is a tight end at USC. But he says this, Greg Biggins and I, this comes from Tom Lloyd, by the way, who works for 24/7 Sports. He says that Greg Biggins and I have crystal balls in picks in for USC. That said, I don't feel nearly as good about that pick as I once did. He is very open and he's strongly considering other options. We'll see if these visits change things, but keep an eye on the Ducks. Oregon is a big contender in this race, but then here's the kicker. BYU could absolutely get this one done as well. People need to realize how big of a threat they are right now, unquote. Get excited, folks. That's cool to see that because that means that Aaron Roderick and Matt Mitchell, they have done their darndest to get Ryder Lyons interested in BYU. I know they just recently added a commitment from Keneal Sweetwine. Ryder Lyons is going to go on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So they're not going to line up in the same recruiting class because simple fact of the matter is Keneal will come in immediately, whereas Ryder will defer and come in after a mission. BYU is in the mix. Because think about the teams I just read, the names of the teams I just read. USC, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State. Like that's some heavy hitters. It's much like we talked about Malachi Lee earlier this week out of Hawaii. He's the top rated prospect in Hawaii. He names the top 6. They're all blue bloods. And then there's little old BYU in the mix. NIL, the 11-2 season that BYU just put on under Kalani Sitake. There are a lot of factors that are rolling into this, but that should excite you as a Cougar fan. Ryder Lyons has got an elite, absolutely elite arm, and he's just a fantastic quarterback prospect. I have talked with enough people about Ryder Lyons as a prospect, and they are just effusive in their praise of how good of a prospect he is. They talk about the fact that he processes things at a very, very quick rate. They already mentioned it. Tom Lloyd said he's got an elite arm. He has got all the tools to be a fantastic quarterback. And if he were to pick BYU, I would have a hard time saying that the second he steps on campus at BYU, he's in the mix to start for the BYU. That's how good of a prospect he is. He is getting, like I said, national pub, but to hear that he's definitely planning on making an official visit to BYU, that means that BYU is firmly in the mix And I would say right now, if you read that right there, he says he's going to go officially visit USC, Oregon, and BYU. That sounds like to me that he's got a final three. Now, could Ohio State or Michigan get in the mix with those unofficial visits? That very well could be the case based on what he's saying. But it screams to me that BYU's swinging for the fences and they're punching right now, and they're going to have a chance. I'm not saying that they're going to win this by any means, because once again, there is still a ways to go. July is an eternity in the recruiting realm. We are in the month of February. We're talking almost 6 months. So much. I mean, so much could change in that time. But the fact that Ryder Lyons has got BYU in that definitely territory where he's going to officially visit, and a guy like Tom Loy, who's got his ear close to the ground about recruiting, says BYU could absolutely get this one done as well. People need to realize how big of a threat they are right now. That's cool to see. That means that BYU, they're generating that positive buzz out there on the recruiting front, and people are sitting up and paying attention to it. Ryder came and visited BYU last year and brought some of his teammates who are very, very talented players. They recently offered an offensive tackle from Folsom that apparently Ryder's very close to. Vlad Dianakov, I believe, is his name. He's a Ukrainian native, if I'm not mistaken. And if you can use that to parlay getting Ryder to BYU, by any means necessary, get a guy of his caliber. I've talked about it once on this podcast. I'll talk about it again. The 2026 cycle for recruiting for BYU is where they need to make hay. You want to see a massive upgrade of the overall talent base in the BYU football program. I think it's gone up since BYU officially joined the Big 12. I will say that. But if you want to see it take another leap, they got to cash in on the 2026 class. There is a lot of high-level talent, and the ties of a lot of that talent to BYU, whether they're via family, whether they're via the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you've got to be able to cash in on this. And that's really exciting to hear that a guy like Ryder Lyons is seriously interested, or at least weighing what his options are, and BYU is one of those options. That's really, really cool to hear and see, and fingers crossed. That could be that. If Ryder Lyons were to commit to BYU, he'd be the first 5-star athlete to commit. Is it since Jake Heaps did so in 2010? Very well may be the case. I can't remember any other 5-star talents, but he also would be the crown jewel of the recruiting class for BYU. It would signal once again that BYU is able to recruit among the nation's elite. There's been a long stretch, obviously during the independent era, that BYU struggled to retain or attract and retain top-tier talent. Well, now they're members of the Big 12 and they're competing at a high level in the Power 4 ranks. That means the BYU, they're showing that they've got some ability to really swing. And I would love to see Ryder Lyons ultimately pick the Cougars, because I really do think that he has got all of the tools to be a fantastic, if not a legendary type quarterback at the collegiate level. Now, it's projecting years and years down the line, but I'm telling you, this kid, he has been scouted as heavily as anybody out there when it comes to camps and the like, and it's hard to come across anything that questions what he can do. He is considered to be one of, if not the top athlete in this recruiting class, or at least a quarterback, and that's really cool to see, and that could be a real game changer for BYU if he were to pick the Cougars. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Valentine's Day. Hope you enjoy the holiday. As always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, share it with your family and friends. And once again, as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you for being an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.